Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on the show, and welcome back to the new podcast with ASHISH. You might have seen him on the UPWORDS, if you remember. And today we'll be discussing about Kashmiri Pandits. And we won't say it migration; it was more of a kicking out of the valley. So, thank you for coming on the podcast, sir.
Thank you, Digambarji, for having me on your show.
Yeah,
It's a pleasure being here.
thanks a lot. Uh, so, sir, if we start from the beginning, so can you tell me about right from like 1100 1200 AD एक कश्मीर की सर कल्चर हेरिटेज कैसा कश्मीर था पहले सो विल कम जो अभी प्रेजेंट सिचुएशन है बट राइट फ्रॉम द बिगिनिंग कश्मीर के बारे में थोड़ा बहुत बिकॉज a lot of people are aloof about Kashmir, the rest of India, I guess.
जी तो Kashmir is basically like I've said in many places before that Kashmir is the fountainhead of the Indian civilization in a lot of ways. Fountainhead because a lot of what we know as Hindu Dharma today and what we know of as our culture has been originated in Kashmir, right? Whether it was the tantric systems, the Shaiva and Shakta traditions, even the Tibetan Buddhism that we are familiar with, right? So that also traveled from India to Kashmir, from Kashmir to Tibet, and then mixed with local influences and produced the very specific kind of Buddhism that we see in Tibet. So that is why, Ladakh, Spiti, and Tibet, that entire belt has a very uniform sort of culture across the belt. So that all that originated in Kashmir. So Kashmir did have a lot of things to contribute. In like Natya Shastra, the major commentaries that we have today, through which we understand the spirit of the text, were written by Kashmiris, and the most famous of them being Acharya Abhinavgupta, who's written some phenomenal treatises on the Natya Shastra as well as aesthetics, and of course Kashmir Shaivism. So Kashmir that way has been like, it was basically, it's like, even when you look at the map of India, Kashmir is the head. So Kashmir really was the brain, the intellectual center of Indian high culture, which is not to say that there was nothing else going on elsewhere, but I'm just saying that predominantly, if you look at what did Kashmir stand for, this is what it was. And the influence of Kashmir traveled all throughout the land and, reached as far as down south in Tamil Nadu as well. So the link, the very, the DNA of the Indian civilization is deeply embedded in Kashmir. And so today it's very funny when people say that, how is Kashmir even a part of India? Because of ignorance and because they don't really know how deeply we are connected. And they don't know the consequences of what will happen if India loses Kashmir, not just politically, but also in terms of the very, the fabric of Indian society, the fabric of Indian culture. So that is at stake. So Kashmir was, as was the rest of India, a completely dharmic land, and there were phases when there was the rise of Buddhism and then back again to Hinduism. These divisions did not exist back then. They were mostly, there was of course a lot of polemical confrontation between different sects and sampradayas all the time. But that was the tradition. That was the Indian tradition of having debates and discussions. And sometimes those debates got very ugly, no doubt about that. But it always remained intellectual in nature. It never came down to the fact that, you took someone's head and chopped it off and said, no, why don't you believe in what I'm saying? So Kashmir, of course, being the intellectual nerve center of the Indian civilization, had these ups and downs and, sort of one system of thought prevailed at one time, another did. Finally, I think, by the time of what we call medieval India, that is around 12th century of Common Era, Jainism was well established in Kashmir, and then like the rest of India, came under the influence of
Yeah.
Islamic rulers. That is
Yeah.
what happened in Kashmir also, somewhere around the 14th century. So, um, so that itself, that led to a complete change in the demographics, starting from the 14th century to what we saw in the 20th century in 1990. Um, so the advent of Islam in Kashmir happened through mere chance, because the first ruler um, who adopted Islam was not actually a Muslim, and by a stroke of what do you say, luck or destiny, he ended up choosing Islam and formed alliances with other Muslim rulers, and got on the throne. He actually wanted to first embrace Hinduism, but that didn't happen for various reasons. And then he became Muslim, and from then on, then there was a steady influx of Muslim kings and emperors, or shall we say tyrants, who
Yeah.
ruled the valley for the better part of the medieval period.
Yeah.
And finally, it ended with the Pathan rule, which was the most brutal of all rules, in which even the local Muslims had to, suffer a lot with the rape and loot and plunder that they did. And finally, it was one Kashmiri Pandit who managed to invite the Sikh empire to come to Kashmir, and to take control of the situation there. And that is when the Sikhs came. And finally, after the British period, then there was a treaty, and the Dogra rule happened, which lasted till the independence of India, and when Kashmir acceded to India, and the rest of it we already know.
Yeah. So as we know about, we rarely know about in India about the Kashmiri exodus, which happened after 1990. But there were like 6 more exodus which happened in histories. Can you just tell a little bit about? Then we come to the main exodus which happened in
Yeah. So I
1990.
mean, yeah. So like I said, I mean, I don't remember the exact place marks, the dates of when each exodus happened. I'll have to refer to the literature there. But it was basically a steady, you know, steady takeover of the valley by Islam, and that takeover happened by means of converting the population to Islam. So you will see over the period of a few centuries, Kashmir Valley turning from 100% Hindu to almost completely Muslim. So that happened over 4 or 5 centuries. And during this period, as this was happening, a lot of people got converted. Naturally, a lot of people got killed. There was massive bloodshed, and genocide, um, and obviously some people escaped. So those exoduses that we talk about are when people could not take it any longer, and then they had to move out in large numbers. But in the pre-modern era, it was not so easy. Like in the 90, 500,000 people actually vacated the valley overnight. But in the pre-modern era, it was not so easy with
Yeah.
the modern means of transportation not available, and generally traveling being a challenging task. So the volume of people getting converted was higher than people leaving, and that is how we count those 6 exoduses, and which happened under different dynasties and different rulers.
Yeah. So, right after the independence, if we talk about, what are your views about uh, the leadership at that time? If we talk about Jawaharlal Nehru and the Abdullahs, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, what were their views? What was going in their mind around that time in
Well, I
1946?
think, you see, I mean, that much is pretty clear, that Jawaharlal Nehru is the father of not just Indira Gandhi, but also Nehruvian secularism.
Yeah.
so, so you see, his way of looking at things was that if there is there is this majority, the only Muslim majority state in India. So the only way to integrate it would be by extending them uh, undue benefits and giving them those privileges that were not given to other states, right? So his idea was appeasement, and I think that to some extent it is unfair to judge him very harshly, though I am no fan of Nehru, but it's a little unfair because at that time maybe he just thought in some way that it would work. Uh,
Yeah.
Whereas Sardar Patel was very, very clear right from the start that this is not going to work. These things, and maybe he was a more astute politician and a more, he had a better understanding of the psyche of the people. But then what Nehru tried was that he tried to, pamper the people of Kashmir and make them feel special. Um, and it worked for a while, in the sense that Kashmir was largely peaceful after it acceded to India. And during that time, there was a massive, a massive
Tribal
sort of move.
invasion.
No. I mean, that tribal invasion happened right in the beginning. I'm talking about the period after that. See, when the just before the accession, the tribal invasion and all that is part of history.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the period when it acceded to
Succeeded.
India, and Nehru was the prime minister, and then Sheikh Abdullah was banished and house arrested in Kodaikanal. So that period, you had mostly people as representatives of the Indian government of the Congress party. They were like installed as puppets in the valley to take care of the law and order and stuff. And at that time, a lot of Kashmiri Muslims also got educated, and it was a period of emancipation for them as well. They came up to speed with modern values and the modern life. Like I said, they got educated, they got government jobs, and in this period, they saw a general rise in their standard of living, which was happening in various other parts of India also, but more so in Kashmir because Kashmir was being flooded with funds and all sorts of privileges uh, and favors. So in this period, it seemed to be working, and I think that Jawaharlal Nehru probably would have thought that at least this is something that my policy is working, and he would have felt vindicated to some extent. But that did not last too long because when Sheikh Abdullah got back to power, and then there was the the Indira Sheikh Accord, according to which there was an agreement between Indira Gandhi and Sheikh Abdullah, and Sheikh Abdullah was brought back to Kashmir. He was freed from house arrest, and he was sort of installed as the chief minister. And immediately after getting installed as the chief minister, he started his nefarious activities again because he was extremely ambitious, and he had this ambition of being the sole, like an emperor. He had that dream of being the absolute power as far as Kashmir was concerned. And then again the separatist activities started.
Yeah.
So uh, from there, in the mid 70s to the 1990, it was a very, very sharp decline, and then suddenly things got out of control.
So right around when he was given the chief minister position back, so what was Pakistan's view? Like, what was the ISI and all those people? Were they in contact with Sheikh Abdullah? Was something going on in their mind? Like, if we can.
No, look, I wouldn't be able to comment on that because I don't really have access to those classified. I mean, I haven't done any serious research on all that. But the fact is that at that time, the major problem that Pakistan was facing was the two that they had two different regions to control, right?
Yeah.
The
East.
Bangladeshi part, the East Pakistan and the West Pakistan. And after the 72 war, Bangladesh was freed. So Pakistan was in a very bad shape at that time. So it did not have the wherewithal to to do that kind of insidious activities in Kashmir. Although it is safe to say that Sheikh Abdullah was always in touch with the ISI. He was always, playing that double game of taking the best from India and Pakistan, which continues to be the policy of all Kashmiri politicians till date. So that template is in fact Sheikh Abdullah's legacy of playing both ways, both sides. But when General Ziaul Haq, when he came to power, he took over the reins of Pakistan. That is when things got really deadly, because then the sole aim of Pakistan was to destroy India and to what is that famous statement that he made, that, destroyed by bleeding it by 1,000 cuts, right? Bleeding India by 1,000 cuts. So that policy, when they adopted, Kashmir was the first victim of that because of its history and its geographical location.
Yeah, and I guess General Ziaul Haq was also invested. He invested his time a lot in Punjab with all that Khalistan movement stuff.
Correct.
So I feel like sometimes why Kashmir, that you said it has a huge legacy of artists and think tanks, but like why Kashmir right now at this present moment is very important to us. So there are a lot of people in West, like Ilan Omar, they say that there should be a referendum. Kashmir should be left alone to the people. If Kashmir is a separate state, if it becomes a separate state, though it won't, but why it would be such a important place? Like why it holds such an important place? Is it the CPEC stuff going on with Pakistan, or through this China might come inside?
So there are many geopolitical reasons to hold on to the territory of Kashmir for the Indian state, and the link between China and Pakistan being one of them, the strategic location of Kashmir as such. All that is fine, but the most important part is that if Kashmir goes, then it becomes a precedent for the rest of India to break. You see, if you look at what happens in various parts of India today, in terms of these small pockets like Malda, for example, where there is, where Muslim mobs go on a rampage, destroy public property, burn down police stations, and come out openly chanting all kinds of aggressive slogans. Whether you have that, or in places like Mamalapuram in Kerala, all sorts of things are going on. And now even in the heart of Delhi, when the anti-CEA protests happen, and people talk about, cutting off the northeast from the rest of India, that chicken's neck example. So it happened because of, it has a direct precedent in what happened in Kashmir in the 1990, and how the Indian state just watched like a mute spectator when 500,000 people were kicked out. So that encouraged these separatist forces within the country, as well as their handlers outside, to take it to the next level, right? Once you've done one thing, then obviously the very next step would be to replicate it, to scale it up in other parts of the country. And from that standpoint, if you lose Kashmir, then nothing, in my opinion, can stop India from falling apart.
Kind of a domino effect. If we lose Kashmir, then Punjab, and then Tamil Nadu, and then Nagaland, and all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, like, all of a sudden, I read this date, 1990, 19 January, when this thing started, the exodus started. Before these, there has to be something the government might be doing within like a decade or 10 years, slowly and steadily. These kind of nefarious acts, which you just mentioned. Can you explain about how the government was doing all sorts of nefarious acts from 70s and 80s up till 1990? Maybe.
You see, the government, what the government was doing was looking the other way. You see, it wasn't that the government was indulging in terrorism. It was the local population that was. It was everyday common people. Like I'll give you an example. In the early 80s, my parents were transferred to a remote village in Anantnag district. It was really remote, and so we were living as tenants in one of the Muslims there because there were no Hindu villages in that area. And the landlord used to sort of disappear for months uh,
Yeah.
somewhere. And this was at a time when there was no apparent violence. There was nothing that would make you feel insecure as a Hindu. Because, while there were everyday discriminations and, things like that that made you realize that you are living like a second class citizen, but we had more or less adapted to that sort of life over several generations, right? So it didn't even feel odd to us. But this guy, he used to disappear, and his wife thought that he was actually having an affair, and she used to complain to my mother that this guy goes away and he has kids and he doesn't have any sense of responsibility. But he used to come back like 3 months, 6 months later, and loaded with cash, right? And so even his wife used to be happy कि मतलब जो भी है चलो पैसे वैसे कमा के तो आ रहा है मतलब बढ़िया
Yeah.
है चल रहा है.
Yeah.
So no one really knew what is happening. And it is only later on when we look back that we realized he was actually going across the border and
Yeah.
getting
Training and stuff.
trained.
Yeah.
Correct. So this is what was going on. So what the local government at that time was doing, especially the people of the National Conference, who were mostly in power at that time, or in alliance with Congress. So the local politicians, what they were doing is uh, dilly-dallying with their Pakistani handlers, with the ISI,
Yeah.
and encouraging this sort of transaction to grow.
Take place.
Uh, and so people were going, they were earning money, they were getting trained in arms. There was a lot of infiltration happening. Arms were getting supplied. They were getting stored in local mosques. And this was with the knowledge of the administration, but everyone was, sort of looking the other way by design,
Yeah.
because they had these plans in mind. And ultimately, it led to what it did. Another incident, very interesting anecdote. In around it was 1987 or 88. Our house was getting renovated, and there was this local mistri who was, was working on the floor of one of the bathrooms, and there was this slight misalignment in the floor where water was getting collected. So my aunt, we used to live in a joint family. So my aunt kind of reprimanded him and said that, this is not how good work that you've done, and you need to take care of this. And she sort of scolded him, and he retorted in a very sarcastic manner. He said, "Why are you even worried about what is happening here in your house? Because this
Yeah.
house will ultimately come to us only.
Yeah.
Why are you worried?" And so my aunt thought that this guy is slightly crazy. He doesn't know what he's saying, and she ignored it. When we later on, when we had to leave Kashmir, then we connected the dots. Okay, actually, that guy that day he actually said this. So the undercurrents
Yeah.
in the whole Muslim society were that this is going to happen. We are going to do this. So this was a properly planned strategic move, and this was planned almost over a decade. And common people knew about it, but they did not let the secret escape from within their community. So no Hindu had a whiff of what was going to happen in 1990, which ultimately took us by surprise.
Lately, I was reading this book from Rahul Pandit. I just wanted to know the life of Kashmiri Pandits, where he said that one day a milkman came to his house and he saw from outside that there's a painting. Yeah, I like this painting. One day it'll be mine. So it is kind of
Exactly.
so. I cannot even imagine, for example, in Dehradun, in my house, if someone comes and from outside they see that this is a nice painting, it will be mine. So that is something which is very
No, so that's
shocking.
so the reason that I tell this story is precisely for that effect,
Yeah.
and with that reason in mind, that why I am telling my story is because I want the learnings of that story to be shared with everyone in India, so that if tomorrow something like this happens, God forbid, if it happens to you,
Yeah.
you know exactly what is going on, right? So
Yeah.
there is a lot of sense in being paranoid when it comes to survival,
Definitely, I
and
understand.
and so if something like that happens to anyone, that a Muslim comes and tells them that this is going to be ours, so it is safe to assume that there is something brewing, and we need to take corrective action.
Yeah. Even on the government level, I was reading a report where the chief minister was actually releasing people from the jail, and they were going to Pakistan to train, and then they used to come back. And one of them were Bitta Karate, Yasin
Hmm.
Malik, and all these people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, all these people. So these guys were called area commanders. So they had these areas assigned to them. It was like a mafia, but more open and with like massive public support. They were not like what is called the what is it the what is the term for the mafia that you use? Um, the Mumbai. क्या बोलते हैं यार उसको अंडरग्राउंड नहीं
Uh, uh, कुछ underboss, Don.
नहीं नो नो सो there is this specific term very common मेरे दिमाग से निकल रहा है. So when you say that it exists beneath the surface, common life goes on, but there is a world of
Underground
crime that there is a world of crime
crime going on. Yeah.
going on. So that is the mafia. Here it was the other way around. It was very much integrated, very much part of uh, the common life, and you had people from ordinary families joining this movement, the Tehreek, so to speak, and it had massive public support. Everyone in Kashmiri society is uh, somehow or the other connected with this terrorist movement.
Yeah. So more of what I feel like, if you can just tell me if I'm right, I think it was more of a political war for Pakistan and for the people, for the local of Kashmir. It was more of an ideological war, and they were using their political expertise through their ideological thinking and whatever, and then
No,
they.
I think no, no.
Is it,
Here is where there is a cognitive error in uh, in the popular narrative around these issues, because when Hindus think about it, they think of politics as separate, and religion as separate, and all those kinds of notions. But when it comes to the Islamic world, it is very hard to separate politics from religion, and to say that okay, Pakistan has a political agenda and not a religious or a
yeah,
theological agenda, because it is so well integrated in their psyche itself, and that is why the people respond to those calls of violence in such with such enthusiasm, because where politics starts and where religion ends uh, is not defined, or and I argue it is not even definable. Um, so so that line of inquiry itself is pointless, because you will never be able to put your finger on what is religion and what is politics there. It's very well integrated. There is a seamless connection between the two.
yeah, completely agreed. Uh, so did you get this, and were you not able to understand that whenever this genocide kind of happens on a certain community, the entire community grows stronger? So if we take the case of 1984, where the entire Sikh community are together, that never forget and never forgive these people. So did you have any kind of were you upset that the entire Hindu community of India were not able to connect? They were not able to understand like what was happening in Kashmir.
Yeah, there was a profound sense of ignorance as well as indifference in the Hindu community outside Kashmir. Um, Ignorance because they did not even know what was going on, and partly it is explainable because the media was not the free media that I mean, it's still not free, but it was not the private-owned media that we are familiar with today. Uh, all media was controlled by the state, and so it showed very little of what was happening. And so you could explain part of the ignorance to that. But the state of the Hindu society itself in India is such that we have no sense of history. We have no sense of our pre-colonized existence. We don't know what our society was like. We don't know uh, the kind of troubles and the kind of sacrifices that our ancestors have made for us to remain Hindu, right? And so we take all that for granted and have embraced modernity like a sheep would embrace uh, the the slaughterhouse, not knowing where they're headed. So the state of the society itself is so pathetic that they did not even know. Like for example, when we came to Delhi and we were looking for a house to rent, a lot of people, they asked us, okay, where are you from? We said Kashmir. They said, okay, okay. Oh, so your festival must be around the corner, like Eid is coming. So we said, no, 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 we are Hindus. He said, how is it possible? I said, why? They said, no, because you are from Kashmir. How can you be Hindu? Like things like that. They didn't even have an idea that there were Hindus in Kashmir. And I'm talking
Yeah.
about an urban center like Delhi.
Yeah.
They didn't know. So the state of the society itself was, I mean, society was in so much darkness itself that what happened, they didn't even register uh, what what really took place and the implications of that on their own lives.
Yeah.
So it was that dark an era. And
Um,
but I'm glad that things have changed, especially with the coming of the internet. That people have now discovered these things and have begun to speak about it.
yeah. Completely agree. So there's a name which pops up every time. The first Muslim Home Minister of India, the Mufti Saeed, and what happened right when he came to the power? His granddaughter, or I guess nephew, was kidnapped, and then then the Indian government had to release five
Yeah,
prisoners.
his
His,
daughter Rubaiya Sayyed, she was kidnapped, and it was common knowledge in Kashmir, although there are no official records for that. But it was common knowledge in Kashmir that it was all an orchestrated activity because they had to secure the release of a few terrorists, and all that was done. Um, and so you can imagine how the situation must have been when the Home Minister of India is a person who's actually collaborating with terrorists in the valley and getting his own daughter abducted so that a few terrorists may be released. Uh, and this guy is taking care of the I mean, the most important portfolio, arguably after the prime minister. So
and
yeah, I mean,
they were not under radar also at that time because of the media and stuff. They were not being covered.
yeah. I mean, no one was questioning that. No one questioned that. Even today, when people say that, when these guys, a lot of Muslims accuse Hindus of actually conspiring with the Indian state. So that is their theory.
Yeah, there.
That the Hindus conspired with the Indian state and left the valley so that the army would be brought in and they would go around killing Muslims. So that is their theory. This is such a brain dead narrative, but unfortunately they have the access to all kinds of amplification channels and all kinds of media outlets internationally that they can say this with a straight face. They can tell, they can go around telling people that actually Hindus left everything behind, left their heritage, their culture, their possessions, their very identity behind, just because they wanted the Indian government to go around killing Muslims. So that is the kind of narrative that they have spread. But like I said, I mean, you had Mufti Muhammad Sayyed, as the home minister, and the Muslims blame Jagmohan for orchestrating the eviction of Kashmiri Hindus. But Jagmohan was not a sovereign ruler. He was not like a king. He was only following orders from the home ministry.
Yeah.
And if you have to blame anyone, it is the home minister that needs to be blamed. So if you're making the case that it was the Indian government who did it, then the blame falls on Mufti Muhammad Sayyid, no one else.
Yeah. And I think there might have not been any cases. I think there's not even a single case which has been registered. A crime case has been registered against.
Correct. You know, and another interesting thing, right? So that is a given. You know, that I mean, like they say, all sorts of slogans are raised. No, this lives don't matter, those lives don't matter. The truth of the matter is that in the global context, Hindu lives actually don't matter.
In India,
right? Yeah, even outside. I mean, if they don't matter in India, how will they matter outside? You tell me.
Yeah.
I mean, India is the only homeland of Hindus, and if the Indian state cannot take care of the Hindus, then who will? So when we left from Kashmir, we did not leave with the intention of leaving forever. Most people did not, and I can speak for all my relatives and my own family and extended family. We only thought that we would be leaving just to, you know, when things settle down, and you know, the Indian army would come, and then they would basically take care of the situation. They would bring back law and order, and then we can come back and, you know, rejoin our jobs and go back to schools and stuff like that. But that never happened, because the thing got so out of control that we never had a chance to actually take that step back. So it was an irreversible eviction for us.
So one thing I just want to know about is the Kashmiri mindset, the Kashmiri Hindu mindset. I was reading where today it was Exodus which was happening, and the next day the family was in Srinagar. The son wanted to take revenge, and the father said, "No, you have to go to school. We'll be registering you in a school. You do your study." So what is this Kashmiri Hindu mindset? And because today, if you see Kashmiri Hindus, there are all sorts of positions. They are taking part in theater, art. They are abroad, well settled. But when we see the Muslims in Kashmir, they're still the stone pelters. So what do you think about this mindset?
No, I think it is not entirely true. The Muslim community is doing pretty well for itself. It's just that because Muslims are, they outnumber the Hindus, so they are more, you know, they represent all classes in the society. There are people who are doing extremely well for themselves. They're professors, they're academics, they're artists, all sorts of things, even in the Muslim community. And there are the stone pelters who, you know, who usually come from the economically weaker sections. Which is not to say that the economically stronger sections of society do not participate in terror or violence. They do it in different ways. They enable violence rather than actually going on the streets and, you know, picking up stones. So that said, it is not fair to say that it is only Kashmiri Hindus who are doing well for themselves. But this is also a trope which has been popularized, especially by the Muslims, who go on to say that, look, these guys left, and, you know, they are doing all kinds of, inke to ash ho gaye. They're living in New York and Toronto and Europe and, you know, all sorts of places, and they're doing well for themselves, and that is what they were looking for, and they left us behind to suffer under the hands, the oppression of the Indian state. So that is the foolish narrative.
Yeah.
But as far as the Kashmiri Hindu mindset is concerned, I don't know if you can characterize it like that. I don't know if there is a Kashmiri Hindu mindset at all, and I don't know if any other community would have acted any differently from us. But it must be said that in India, especially in the so-called right wing, right? Although I don't believe in that that term, but people who self-identify as right-wingers,
Yeah.
they tend to have this notion that, Kashmiri Hindus are a docile lot, and, they just, they were kicked out of the valley and they did not resist. And there was no, they don't have it in them to take back the land that was snatched from them. So that's the kind of narrative. That's one kind of narrative that is popular among certain circles. But it must be said that for 5 centuries, uh, Kashmir remained a part of the Indian civilization and remains uh, so even to this day, because of the struggles and the sacrifices of my ancestors, of Kashmiri Hindus. And there are numerous stories, and I think we're also doing an upward video on this part of the history, which is never talked about. How Kashmiri Hindus have been instrumental in retaining Kashmir for the Indian civilization, in keeping the flag of Sanatan Dharma flying high in Kashmir, despite getting killed and tortured and raped and kicked out over centuries. Yet we did not give up on on Hinduism. So that is something that needs to be said about what happened in 1990, and the fact that we chose to um, look the other way and chose to focus on our careers. I don't think we had a choice. In 1990, we were talking about a society. We were surrounded by ordinary men and women who were carrying AK-47s, right?
Yeah.
Women did not carry AK-47s usually. It was men who were
Yeah.
armed, and these men, they were ordinary people. They were like, your next door neighbor would have arms. So how do you deal with such a situation? Who is going to provide you arms? And you're already outnumbered. And then who how, you will not even think about resisting, because you are in trouble. It's like saying that you are in a war zone without any arms, without any protection of any kind, and then you will say that, look, I am going to fight you. That is nothing but foolishness. So what we did, what was necessary for us to survive, and we left the valley.
Yeah.
And this over this period, we had sort of, like I said in the earlier also, that we had developed this strategy of survival over centuries, because we were going from bad to worse. Our position was weakening from before, with every passing year. And so we had sort of learned to live under oppression without creating too much trouble. Because if we did, we would either be killed, women would be raped, or we would be converted.
Yeah.
So just to survive, we had to adopt those strategies of just concentrating on what you do, make a good life, make a good career, or concentrate on your education, and basically get the hell out of Kashmir. So by the time I was born, it was already a norm among Kashmiri Hindu families to send their children out for education, and tell them that you don't need to come back. You just settle there. So a slow exodus was anyway happening, and chances are that if this 1990 the mass exodus hadn't happened, the younger generation would have anyway moved out of the valley.
Okay.
Over, of course, over a period of 10-20 years.
So after 1990, so how was the refugee camps? And because I've seen all sort of movies of refugee camps in Afghanistan, in Syria, and all. It's very difficult to live. For example, a family who has 22 bedrooms in a house, or who has a big bungalow mansion called, and then they have to just live in one room. So how was the refugee camps? Are they still today?
No, regardless of your financial position in the valley, whether you were affluent or whether you were poor, the experience of living in a refugee camp is equally miserable for everyone.
Yeah.
Because even if you have a small house in a village, had a small house in a village in Kashmir, you had your own place, you had your own way of living, and you had been there for centuries. You grew your own food, and you were basically living a dignified life. And this dignity is what was under, I mean, it was just directly trampled under the feet of the transition that happened overnight when we had to move out of Kashmir, and a lot of families had to stay in these refugee camps where there was no privacy, where 20 people were cramped in a small space under tents. Most Kashmiris had never even stepped out of their villages. Like there were people from remote villages who hadn't even been to Srinagar. And so they were used to a certain kind of life. The weather in Kashmir was temperate. Suddenly you were living in a tent under 45 degrees, 46 degrees Celsius temperatures. There were people dying of snake bites and heat strokes. People didn't even know. They were not even used to having so much water. Like, in plains, people have a lot of water because they keep rehydrating themselves. But that was not even part of our habit to have so much water, right? Because in Kashmir, it was different. The weather was different. So then there were mental issues, psychological problems. A lot of people got what is that syndrome called? Dementia. A lot of people suffered from that, especially the older generation, and all sorts of misery and suffering people went through living in those conditions. And it was of course a very difficult time. I was lucky not to have to live in a refugee camp because my parents were professionals, and by God's grace, we moved to Delhi and they got jobs very quickly. So we lived in a very, very confined space somewhere, which was not anything remotely resembling how we used to live in Kashmir. It was very different, very oppressive that way. But thankfully, it was not a refugee camp. And living in a refugee camp is, it's the worst kind of punishment that you could have given anyone.
So during that decade and then decade followed after that, so how's government point of view? Because a lot of governments came in. The Atal Bihari Vajpayee government came in, and then Dr. Manmohan Singh's government came. Now Narendra Modi. So, what did they had any think? Were they trying to do anything for the Kashmiri Pandits? What were their point of view on this issue?
No, look, I think that if we look at the Indian state as an entity, and then look at the electoral politics and say that, okay, the Indian state is headed by different governments, different parties, right? Depending on who wins the election. For us, the experience has been pretty uniform. That anyone who happens to be at the top, any party who wins the election, their attitude with respect to Kashmiri Hindus has been pretty much the same, which is a form of lip service, that they will tell you that, okay, yeah, you guys have suffered, and it has been a terrible thing. We know, we understand, but we will do something. And there is no seriousness in their intent. And this has been uniform across party lines, across different kinds of leaders, with, I would say to some extent, with the exception of P.V. Narasimha Rao, who, now that he's no more, I think I can be a little more candid in terms of describing how he approached the problem. So one of the Kashmiri Pandit delegations that went to meet the Prime Minister Narasimha Rao back then, my father was part of one such delegation, and he told me this he quoted him directly. So what happened was that people were talking about this, and then finally my father asked him the question that, Prime Minister, I mean, all this is fine, you're giving us these relief packages or whatever for the more marginalized sections, and you're talking about whether it should be, the relief amount should be 10,000 or 7,000 or 5,000. These are all small things as far as the bigger picture is concerned. So what do you have to say about us, going back to our place? So So Narasimha Rao ji, he heaved a sigh of, exasperation of sorts, and he said, "Dekho beta," and these I'm quoting him as far as I can
Yeah.
remember. So he said, "Dekho," he said in Hindi, "Dekho beta, अभी मैं नरसिम्हा राव बोल रहा हूँ, मैं भारत का प्रधानमंत्री नहीं हूँ और बाहर जाके मीडिया से ये सब मत बताना। मैं तुम्हें ये बता रहा हूँ कि जो कश्मीरी हिंदू हैं वो कश्मीर वापस नहीं जा सकते। आप लोग कश्मीर को भूल जाओ और आप अब यहाँ रहने की तैयारी करो लंबे अरसे के लिए, मतलब आप भूल जाओ कश्मीर को।" तो देन माय डैड आस्क्ड हिम, "बट व्हाट अबाउट what do we do then? What have you thought about us then? If you are telling us to forget about Kashmir?" He said, "आप उसकी चिंता मत करो, हम आपको कहीं पे सेटल कर देंगे। भारत बहुत बड़ा देश है, आपको भारत के किसी अन्य भाग में सेटल कर देंगे." So that was a very pragmatic approach, if you ask me, because what is at stake for us right now is not just our link to Kashmir, but our very identity and our very survival. So if we were to be settled in one place as a community, right, as far as possible, not everyone will be there, but if the government had made that effort and said that, look, as long as we cannot guarantee Kashmiri Pandits a safe return, and the situation in the valley is not conducive for their return, till then it is incumbent upon the Indian state to settle them as a community so that they can preserve their way of life, they can preserve their culture, and they have a sense of community. So that would have been an excellent thing to do, but unfortunately he did not remain the prime minister for too long, and then things changed, and all other prime ministers without exception have been extremely I mean, what should I say? I mean, they have displayed a pathetic sort of indifference towards Kashmiri Hindus. And whenever they talk about Kashmir or Jammu and Kashmir, it is only as an afterthought that Kashmiri Hindus are mentioned, if at all. So the experience has been bad, and I think that it can be explained because, like I've explained in several other talks, that the Indian state sees itself as a guardian of the territory of India. It has no civilizational commitments. If it had civilizational commitments, then it would know the importance of having Kashmiri Hindus settled back in the valley. But because there is no civilizational commitment, you're only looking at somehow keeping the territory with you. So it doesn't matter if Kashmiri Hindus perish as a community, as a culture. So that's how it is.
And what do you think about the Article 370, which was revoked last year? So can you explain me the situation in Kashmir before Article 370 and what?
No, there is no Article 370. I mean, the day it was made inoperative, we had a big celebration at the Upword office. But that celebration was, if you ask me, I celebrated as an Indian.
Yeah.
That today is the day when the legal hurdle between the complete integration of one of the states of India has been removed. That was why I was celebrating. But as far as my identity as a Kashmiri Hindu is concerned, it makes no difference whatsoever. It makes no difference to the terrible reality that Kashmir is demographically unfavorable for the Indian state to keep the flag of Indian civilization flying there. And by Indian civilization, I mean not some sort of military dictatorship there, but that, like the rest of India, it feels connected to India, right? The region feels connected to India. The people of Kashmir, because they are predominantly Muslims, they do not have the same kind of allegiance with the Indian state because they see it as a foreign civilization. They want allegiance with Pakistan because Pakistan is part of the Islamic world. So their loyalties are not even divided. Their loyalties are on the other side.
Yeah.
So you see, so to have that sort of to claim that piece of land back fully as a civilization would require a demographic change
Yeah.
and a long-term demographic change. And I'm not saying that that is necessarily feasible right now. I think that it is such a complex and such a challenging task that I wouldn't hold the government by the neck and say that no, this has to be done tomorrow. But the conversations have to change. The narrative has to change. How the Prime Minister of India speaks about Kashmir has to change. It can no longer be about vikas and development and electricity and jobs, because that is not the problem in Kashmir. The problem with Kashmir is something else. And if the Indian state is not able to even say those things, and if it prefers to be politically correct as opposed to preserve the truth of what is happening in Kashmir, then I think we are in big trouble. And whether there is Article 370 or not, it makes no difference at all.
Yeah. So recently there was a movie which was released by the name Shikara by Vinod Chopra, and it got a huge backlash that it didn't show the true picture. So from media industry, from Bollywood industry, from any point, did you get any support towards Kashmiri Pandits? Were like in this time when the anti-CA protests were happening, there were all sorts of, Deepika Padukone went there, and there were so many woke left-leaning artists like Swara Bhaskar. They say, and though they उन्होंने पढ़ा भी नहीं होगा मेरे ख्याल से वो CA का सारा कुछ NRC का bill, and there was a debate which is good.
उनको पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं. देखो, ये बात तो ऐसी है कि जो कश्मीरी हिंदू हैं वो हिंदू हैं और हिंदू ग्लोबल माइनॉरिटी में है. Hindus have no alliances with other people across the earth. So we are kind of isolated. We are the real minority as far as the global situation is concerned. We are the global minorities, and we are terribly outnumbered globally also. The only saving grace is that we are an overpopulated country, and so our absolute numbers still mean something. That maybe 1 in 8 global citizens is a Hindu, but we are still a minority, and we are concentrated in this one place. While the other people, even if they are in minority in India, whether it is Christians or whether it is the Muslims, they have all sorts of alliances, international alliances going for them, including these cottage industries like human rights. They have the media at their beck and call. Media outlets like Al Jazeera operate freely in India, right? And they spread all kinds of venom and all kinds of vicious propaganda against Hindus in the name of secularism and in the name of liberal thoughts, while they are actually, they come from a place that is a theocracy, right?
Oman, yeah.
And Qatar, I think.
Qatar.
And they also show, when in their programs, they show the Indian map without Kashmir, without a part of Kashmir. So they're broadcasting that in India, and there is no resistance from the Indian government. The Indian government is okay, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, गलत map दिखा रहे हैं तो क्या फर्क पड़ता है. So having no allies globally, having been outnumbered, and having no institutions of our own, having suffered at the hands of colonization, being plundered and raped and looted for centuries, we are in a very, very terrible situation, right? And Hindus do not realize that. So we need to get our act together and treat this as a war. ये प्यारी प्यारी बातें और liberal बकवास करने का समय निकल चुका है, because we are actually facing, an onslaught in the form of violence as well as non-violent methods like propaganda through the media and through these human rights organizations, which claim all sorts of things about India without actually even substantiating it. So the entire global narrative is anti-Hindu, right?
Yeah.
And we are incapable of countering it. We don't have the necessary wherewithal. So that is the situation that we are in right now, and it is no better than when we were under British rule.
Yeah, I understand. But coming back to the Bollywood, which I just mentioned a while back, that around 1990, did Kashmiri Pandit get that support? I think itna support mila bhi
Of
nahi
course
hoga
not. Of
because
course not. Bollywood at that time was even worse than how it is today. It was completely under the control of the D company, and the
yeah,
underworld. Underworld it is called. We were looking
yeah,
at underworld. So it was completely under the control of the underworld, and it's the kind of propaganda that they were doing was at a different level at that time. But people have this sense that Bollywood is some kind of एंटरटेनमेंट है एंटरटेनमेंट तो ठीक है, वो अपना पैसा तो बना रहे हैं,
yeah,
पर वो उसके थ्रू वो आपको क्या सब्लिमिनली क्या मैसेजेस दे रहे हैं वो तो मोस्ट हिंदूज डोंट इवन नो. लाइक टिपिकली लाइक कोई भी पिक्चर देख लोगे तो उसमें किस तरह से व्हेन देयर इज अ मुस्लिम एंड सडनली he will act very
noble,
kindly,
yeah,
yeah, in a very kind manner, and then there will be an azan going on in the background, and the other guy, the Hindu, he will be a wealthy and greedy shopkeeper, and he will always try to lech at women, and he will slap kids and all that. So these stereotypes being propagated, this is a systematic thing that has been going on for decades, and
yeah,
Bollywood is a den of anti-Hindu propaganda.
yeah. So, by the way, did you get chance to see Shikara?
I got a chance, but I rejected the chance
Yeah,
because I had no expectations from it, and I didn't want to spoil my mood. I had seen the trailer, and the trailer was enough to tell me what the movie is going to be like.
yeah,
It is the trailer was terrible, because then people will accuse me, how can you talk about the movie without even watching it? So I'll just comment on the trailer. The trailer was absolutely terrible. It
yeah.
had nothing to do with what was the reality of Kashmir. And then a lot of friends who saw that told me about it. So,
Yeah, there were reports. I mean, there was a lady was shouting at Vidhu Vinod Chopra that they didn't show
right.
the true colors, what was happening there, because they cannot call a spade a spade. That's a problem in India, I think. If there is something which is happening through religious ways, yeah, it is happening through religious ways, and we have to kind of garb it under something that it was happened because they were भटक रखे थे या उनको कुछ पता नहीं था, गलती हो गई इनसे.
Correct. Because they have their own pressures. They have their own, messaging, the virtue signaling that they have to do with the crowd, as well as people who finance them. There is a lot of mess that Bollywood is in, as we know from the Sushant Rajput case itself.
Yeah.
The kind of mess that they have beneath that shiny glamorous surface. So Bollywood is not something where I would even hope for any kind of solidarity. Never.
Yeah, because and it's not even taught in school, because what do you think about our education system? It's completely messed up from what I think.
Yeah, see, I mean, it's actually a literacy system, because our education is basically about getting us to read and write, and to to prepare us for getting a good job in the future. So basically geared towards the industries. But even there we fail, because most people who get employed in industries have to be retrained by the industry itself.
Yeah.
That is the situation that India. So even if you look at it that way, that it's just for occupational purposes, there also we fail. But in terms of real education, so that is completely missing. We are not educated people at all. And anyone who takes the effort of getting educated does so at his or her own expense and by making self-effort. Otherwise, the Indian education is pretty much absent from our lives. There is no such thing as education, I believe.
Yeah. So before we end up our conversation, I would really like if you can recommend some books, some documentaries which people who might be listening, they can read or they can watch to get the knowledge of Kashmiri culture, tradition, and all the exodus which happened from your perspective?
There is this website called ikashmir.net, which has a lot of material on Kashmir, Kashmiri culture, Kashmiri history, politics. It's basically a treasure trove, and anyone can go and check it out, and it's very, very well documented stuff. So that is one. But other than that, I think Rahul Pandita's book is a good book to refer as a memoir. There is Jagmohan's My Frozen Turbulence in Kashmir, where he records what actually transpired in Kashmir in the 80s, and he also goes back all the way to the 14th century onwards and gives a brief account of the history. Um, there is the classical texts like Raj Tarangini, but they are more difficult to read because they're primary sources, and you would really need to be very, very interested in history to be able to go through that material.
Okay.
But as such, in popular mainstream media as well as publishing industry, I don't think much has happened to represent the Hindu point of view, and part of it, partially the blame lies also on the community that we haven't produced much, probably because we were busy just surviving,
Yeah, I
trying to
understand.
make ends meet. But hopefully that will change. But as far as you know, as far as the material is concerned, there is a dearth of material. But
Yeah.
for anyone who wants to get a basic hang of things, the books and the resources that I mentioned would suffice.
And thanks a lot, sir, for coming on the podcast. And
Thank you for having me, and it
thank
was a
you.
pleasure talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Certainly, certainly, it was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I hope you come in future shows too.
Surely, surely.